Okay, looking back at your texture technique practice from yesterday, you're going to identify which of the techniques you felt went best for you and which technique you think you want to use moving forward for the background area of your project, okay? If you maybe have two texture techniques that you like, and aren't sure which one you're going to use, you could practice and experiment with both of those today. So what you're going to do is you're going to identify what is the texture technique that you like best. I personally really like the wet into wet. I also enjoy the plastic wrap, and I do kind of like the effect of this stamping. So in my sketchbook, just as my plan, I am going to write down that that's what my plan is for my project, that I'm going to experiment with wet into wet and maybe plastic, and then this would be for after it was dry, the stamping. So after dry, stamping, question mark, okay? So now I have a plan for which texture technique that I'm going to be using. We're going to be also using a color scheme. So I want to think about and explore color schemes today in my practice. So I'm going to be continuing to practice my texture techniques today in my sketchbook, but I'm going to be doing it with a little more purpose. So I've got a plan for which texture techniques I'm going to be using. Now I need to plan out what color scheme I'm going to be using, because our project is going to have a color scheme. If you're not sure how to plan a color scheme, there's a link in Google Classroom that will take you to something called the Palatone Color Scheme Designer. Otherwise, I have information sheets at your table that explains that analogous is 3 colors next to each other, complementary are 2 colors across the color wheel, split complementary makes a Y on the color wheel, and triad is 3 equally spaced colors. So I'm going to pick 3 color schemes to explore today in my sketchbook with texture techniques. And what I'm going to do is tape off a section in my sketchbook. And if I'm going to start first with analogous, green and yellow, I'm going to work across this top section. So I'm going to be using green and yellow paint. I'm going to be using that texture technique that I decided I wanted to use yesterday or earlier. So maybe I would start this top one and I'd paint different greens and yellows in each of the boxes, and then use plastic wrap on this top row. Then I would paint the next row using wet into wet, and maybe I want to try complementary. This is for practice with the colors and practice with the textures for your project. So if I pull over here a row from my a finished row, you can see that I've used analogous green and yellow colors. I've used darker colors on this side and gradually lighter colors as I've moved this way, because I'm kind of exploring how do I like this best? You can see it's a really different effect if it's very, very light versus very, very dark. This is all part of planning for my portrait project, okay? I want to think about making sure that I use a color scheme so that my work is unified. If I finish with this practice in my sketchbook, the other thing that I need to do is look for information and images for my self-portrait project.